Joe.
Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be covering the Analects and we'll be starting book 10. Jason or Aman, do you wish to give a bit of an overview of book 10 before we actually get into the text?
Yeah, let me start. And book 10 is a very different one, and that will be the last one of the so-called upper text. So when we finish this one, probably in 2-3 sections or 4 sessions, then we're going to switch to Art of War by Sun Tzu and take a few, probably 3-4 months, then we'll come back. So book 10 is very, very different from the rest of the Analects because there's nothing like Confucius said, the master said, there's nothing like this. There's all description about Confucius' behavior, how he walk, how he eat, how he drink, and how he talk. So that's interesting. Then you give you a fresh mind. If you're tired of master said, and that's the book you can read. Yeah. Aman, you want to say something about this?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I would only add that most of these are very pithy, and a few of them can seem quite cryptic. But having gotten this far into the Analects, it should be more obvious to the astute student how these tie back to the lessons of the previous books of the Analects. And even if it's not if you haven't, done your homework thoroughly, there's still very interesting vignettes and will provide a lot of sort of texture for the chapters that we'll do when we return to the lower chapter or the lower canon of the Analects.
Very good. So we will get started with book 10. We usually here get started by reading 2 translations. And then we move on to Jason and Aman's translation. So if anybody would like to read their version of the Analects, I can go ahead and get started with my version. And if Aman or anyone else wishes to read their version, please type exclamation point in the chat. So I will get started with chapter 10. 10.1.
Yeah, let's do 1 and the 2 together. Okay, because they I think it's Leggie's version put them together, and that makes sense to put 1 and 2 together. So
very good, very good. All right. 10.1. In the village, Confucius looked submissive, as though unable to speak. In the royal ancestral shrine and in the court, he expressed himself articulately, though always with prudence. 10.2. In the court, when speaking with the lower grade officials, Confucius mingled with them congenially. When speaking with the upper grade officials, he behaved appropriately. In the presence of his lord, he looked respectful and tensed, hesitating. So that is 10.1 and 10.2. And so, Will, would you like to go ahead and read your version?
Yeah, I see. Did you get the Dasan book?
I did. So
yeah. So I will read from An Ping Chin then.
Okay, good.
In his own community, Master Kong was agreeable and modest, and he gave the appearance of being too clumsy to speak. In the ancestral temple and at court, though fluent and forceful in his disquisitions, he was also cautious and did not say more than was necessary. 10.2. When speaking at court with counselors of the lower rank, he was relaxed and affable. When speaking with counselors of high rank, he was frank but respectful. And in the ruler's presence, though he was filled with reverence and awe, he was perfectly composed.
So, Will, your version does talk about how he walked on 10.2? when the prince was present, does the translation talk about how he walked?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, because I just like to say the text has a lot of walking. Okay, so okay, let me go through this. Okay, so probably not that important if you're only interested in the philosophy. Okay, but if you look at the historical background or ritual, okay, then that's probably important, depending on what's your interest. Okay, so these two chapters basics is talking about how Confucius behaved in his hometown and in his job, which he is a high-ranking officer, and how he talked to the people in the high ranking and talk to the people in the low ranking, and how does he behave in front of his boss, the Lord, the Prince. So 10.1, when Confucius was in his village and the neighborhood, he was courteous, yet behaved as if he could not speak. When he was in the ancestral temple or the court, he was articulate, but very cautious. The word here called 循循如. If you read this one, could be means following the rule. Okay, so 循循, okay, means following the rule systematically. So I was originally used obedience, but it sounds a little bit strange. And I will let Amang say what does he think, but then I decide to use courteous, probably another way to do it. And I heard one student talk about he was agreeable. I think that's also a good word for 循循如, this word. And 10.2, after Confucius behaved different, right? He in the court and in his hometown is different, because in his hometown he still have somebody senior to him. Confucius is not in the high position, but when you are in the court, Confucius is in the high position. Just like you are a CEO in the company, you behave in the same way. But when you come home, assuming you live in a big family, you still in front of your father, your mother, okay, and your older brother, you should not behave as CEO in the company. I think that's the essence on this one. So 10.2 talk about how Confucius talked when he is in the court. At court, Confucius spoke candidly and eloquently with the lower rank minister, and spoke gently with upper rank minister. When the prince was present, he walked in small steps in a proper manner. The reason I'm asking about is this word, 君在处错, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, and 如如于也. These two words, if you look closer, if you know Chinese, you will know that related to foot. Okay, so basics, he is talking about when the prince, when he is in front of prince, he walk small steps, okay, and to show respect, and with the in the proper manner. Okay, so that's what this chapter is about. So Amang, you
yeah, thank you. I really appreciated Jason's translation here. And as just to add to what he was saying about 循循如, 循循如, anytime you hear something doubled in Chinese, it usually indicates emphasis. So there's multiple examples of this, you know, da da, big big, how, good good. And the modern translation for 循 would be something like sincere or earnest. I put it in the chat here so that everyone can actually see what he was referring to. So, and then ru means to be as such. So very, very sincere, very, very earnest. And I think courteous is a better option than obedient, even though obedient could be a way of understanding that sort of extra sincere, extra genuine character. I think here where they're speaking about him speaking with lower ministers, what they're talking about is how did subordinates sort of view him? And when they listened to him, how did they feel they were being communicated to? We've all had sort of the different types of managers, and I'm drawn into comparisons to the cult classic movie Office Space, where you have someone who is so detached, so disinterested in you, you are just treated as a functionary, versus someone who genuinely seems interested in you and sincerely concerned about your well-being. And as to the 10.2, when he's talking about these small silken steps, which I do think that creates a wonderful image. The first word, zu, means something like careful, cautious, smooth, level in modern Chinese. And so you would think of it as these small sort of shuffling steps that we talked about prior, when you are in the presence of somebody you needed to show respect for. There is a whole etiquette around how one comports themselves around others to communicate not just with your words, but through your every action, how you view that person in terms of a social hierarchy. And that social hierarchy still exists very dominantly in Chinese culture to this day. I watched a Australian who was a hotel manager meeting his boss after he had taken the time to have me over for a drink because I was a English speaking guest and needed to be shown an extra consideration. When his boss showed up, he said, "You'll have to excuse me," and then went to speak to his boss, and his whole mannerism changed from where he held his hands, how he nodded in agreement, when he smiled, watching the reactions. This is a sort of nonverbal language that you have to be raised in to really master. And the way I could only liken it for a Western culture is, how do you know when to high five somebody? There's no rule book that tells you this. And how you do it actually is something that we just develop an understanding of by being in the culture for so long. So this description of these tiny steps is trying to, it actually sets the groundwork for this sort of cultural norm to be developed over centuries.
Thank you for that, Aman. Would anybody like to share their thoughts on 10.1? If not, I can go ahead and get us started, but Mark seems to have his hand up. So go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Joseph. I was just wondering about the translation of the first set of characteristics in 10.1 when he's in his, and I thought I heard you, Joseph, say a word that began with S that sounded kind of
submissive.
Like,
I had the same question, actually, the one that you're about to ask with Jason's.
What was the word?
Submissive.
Oh yeah, submissive. And then I think the one Aman read was modest. And yet Jason gave more content to that by translating it as if he was not speaking or not going to speak. So I just thought that was really interesting because modest leaves it kind of vague. So what is the content of the modesty? He's keeping almost at a loss for words, to paraphrase another translation.
Well, that was exactly what mine had said, as though unable to speak. So yeah, so that particular, and I think Jason, actually, I'll let you reply. Go ahead, but
Yeah, I think that's a little bit subtle in the West. I think it's still in the Eastern culture. In front of your senior, you don't talk too much. Oh, that's people complain about me. Not polite because it's in front of your teacher, in front of your parents, and I keep arguing that's not right because you should behave like you are stutter. Okay, so you should not speak. So you should behave like you don't, speak very eloquently. Okay, yeah, I think that shows your respect. Okay, so when Confucius in his hometown, he doesn't talk, is not articulate, right? But in business, he be articulate. So I think that's the way to behave. I'm not saying it's correct or not correct, but that's how he behave. Same way, when he in the court, right? When he speak to the higher rank officer, he is more, what's the word
humble.
Yeah, more humble. Yeah, he in如也, right? In如也speaks gently, but when he speaks to the lower rank, it's 侃侃如也, which means speak more eloquently, so-called 侃侃而谈. That means you keep talking more. So the behavior is different when you talk to, for example, as a teacher, you talk in the way. As a student, you talk the other way. So that's the lesson is teaching here. And this situation still exists in Japan. Their spoken language still have a ranking when you address the person. If the person is higher than you or lower than you, you use different words. For example, I will call myself a spoke I when I talk to my friend or my junior. But when I talk to my senior, my boss, I will not address myself. I will call myself watakushi, right? That means me, okay, humble me. So in Japan still exists in the language. And in Chinese language, especially in written, you still keep this way. You don't say I. It sounds very arrogant. You have to address yourself as small brother, humble me, this kind of word, and address you as a, I think that's this kind of manner or etiquette still exists today.
And so,
go ahead, Mark, do you have another question?
Well, I just was going to mention that it makes me think of the importance of silence and the different ways perhaps in which silence can be interpreted in different circumstances. And here it also reminded me of Huiko's response to Bodhidharma when he remained silent and all of the other students had tried to explain the teaching. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, sometimes I agree with you, Mark, that there's nothing more powerful than the unspoken word. In growing up, I can honestly attest to this, that if my mother didn't want me to do something, she absolutely just remained silent. I would ask and there was no answer. So that was, sometimes saying nothing says a lot. But I think what we can take away with these two chapters, when I look at them, is not only does Confucius have a certain level of humility that he's demonstrating in the court, but he's also showing the ability to adapt to each situation that he's in, whether he's at home, whether he's at the speaking to lower grade officials, or or he's speaking to royal ancestral shrine and in the court. So I think that that's the main point here, is that he's able to adapt and he understands the rituals within each kind of conversation that he's in. And that seems to be of great importance with his, with Confucianism in general. Anyway, so Will, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. Xiangdang or village, is that being contrasted with only with the court, or is it because if you're silent in the village, is there somewhere even less formal than that where you're not silent, or is it saying that even just out in the village as opposed to the royal court, you're still basically not too talkative, just like don't be too talkative even everywhere? That's the question.
So the question is that whether he should show restraint. You're breaking up a little.
Yeah, if you're even acting as though you're unable to speak, like when you're out in the village, is there somewhere where you're less restrained than that, or is that sort of like how you just are supposed to be all the time in this kind of like example?
That's my understanding about Confucianism. Okay, so basically, there's no such thing called informal. Basically, it's also you always follow the rituals. Okay, doesn't matter you are in your so-called village and the neighborhood, xiangdang, or in the court, right? But it's a different ritual. So at home, or you need to, because you have a senior at home, right? You are not in the high ranking. So you have your senior brother, you have the senior uncle, okay? All these people, in front of these people, your ranking in the job doesn't matter. So you should behave in a certain way. But when you are in the court, because you have a job, and we know Confucius' job as a code, and basically should be equivalent to the chief police officer or something like security officer, the chief or interior minister, something like this. So it's a high-ranking job. So he behaved in another way. So I think that's the teaching he's talking about. If you remember on the book, I think the book 1, he talked about when you are at home, you should practice xiao, which is the filial piety. When you go it outside, you have to respect your senior. So they always have some virtue, some rule you need to follow, but it's different. That's the main teaching of Confucius. So if you want to understand better, or compare to Moism, right? Moism will talk about love, universal love. You love my father, and same as love Will's father. In the same way, we all the same, this kind of universal love. And you compare with Taoism, they will reject all this formal ritual. Okay, so we live more individually. So I think that would be, if you consider, that would be different kind of teaching here.
So next up, go ahead, Aman, and then I have Chris.
I just wanted to try and tie a few threads together and point out that only 2 chapters into book 10, without anything of the master said, because of the background we've had, we've already touched on Shao, we've touched on Li, filial piety ritual. And what you were saying before about the adaptivity to be sensitive to whom you are speaking to is kind of the embodiment of ren, of the consideration of your actions as they pertain to another. I did want to also just address something Will said briefly about the levels of formality, and or is there some place where you could be more informal than in the Shangdang? And Jason's answer was absolutely excellent. There is a ritual formality that exists in almost every one of these settings, whether you were at home or in your village, your Shangdang, which is kind of like your extended home, or if you were informally at work. It really wouldn't be except for in sort of the tea houses where you could let your hair down a bit. And then you got to be more informal. That is actually part of the reason why drinking culture is such a big part of modern Chinese culture, because there's this belief, and it's part of culturally, it's reinforced. You are performing in every setting you exist in. The only time we get to see you outside of a performance is when we get a few in you and get enough in you that we get to see your real face, as it were, which is why Chinese business is done over drinks, because they want to get to see the real person that they're dealing with. It's also a big health hazard for the lightweights who decide to enter into Chinese business and then suddenly find themselves drinking like they're at a frat party every night, and understanding why this is. Jason mentioned something about Japanese culture, and Japanese culture wholesale adopted Confucianism. There's I guess it's just an axiom within Japanese culture, but it very much attaches to these ideas that I'm going to butcher paraphrasing this, but it's something to the effect of every man has three faces: the one he shows the world, the one he shows his home, and the one he shows no one at all. And so it's this recognition that there are levels to the individual, and that most authentic self is sort of sequestered away, except for in round and round and round after Baishao. And if you've ever had to drink white wine in China, it's absolutely horrible stuff.
I will keep that in mind. Yes, actually, I think that this, I appreciate you talking about the adaptability part about it, because there's a social element that really plays into the reverential attention that is given to each situation. That means you're actually aware of how you're interacting with each individual, and there's a self-awareness, and that promotes a certain degree of harmony that you can speak to. But you said it much more beautifully. So next up, I have Chris, followed by is it Will, and then Wenzu. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. And then we'll go on to the next group of readings.
Oh, it's Wen Xun. Actually, the pronunciation of Xun is the same as the 10.1. 孔子于乡党循循如也循. I'm just trying to add some point about the concept of 乡党 and 宗庙朝廷, which is the neighborhood or the court, as you guys translated. In my opinion, the court and the neighborhood are kind of constructive and complementary concepts in Chinese culture, because there is a really famous sentence in Chinese culture. It is called 处江湖之远则居庙堂之高则忧其民，处江湖之远则忧其君. The meaning is, when you are in the court, you have to consider about the common people in Jianghu, which is really similar to Xiangdang. And when you are in neighborhood, you have to consider about the king, the emperor, Yes. So, in my opinion, perhaps Xiangdang is a representative of a series of concepts that is related to neighborhood, including political, cultural, or society, or social concept. It's like it is related to low-grade virtual and low-grade ritual and neighborhood and those relationship among people and the social system in neighborhood. And the code also, it is related to high-level noble and the ritual that official people do and what is the formal virtual they performed, etc. So perhaps when Confucius is talking about Xiangdang and Chaoting, Xiangdang can be considered as somewhere out of Chaoting because those concepts, they're constructive and complementary. So you can also consider Chaoting or the cult, the Fengmiao, as somewhere out of the Xiangdang. So there is, if you have to consider the exact meaning of the wording of Xiangdang, there may be somewhere that is lower than Xiangdang. But in that particular sentence, because Xiangdang and Chaoting are constructive, so you could consider all level lower than Xiangdang the same as Xiangdang because those concepts are all constructive with Chaoting. So when Confucius performs 循循如也 in Xiangdang, I believe he would recommend us to perform also 循循如也 to the places that is lower than Xiangdang if we say the places are lower than Xiangdang. That's all of my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually my turn, but
Yes,
I
sure.
want to stop that very interesting addition. All I wanted to say is I side with those translators that maintain that he's saying his village, not just a village, but his home village. So back in truth, that he, I understand it as no man is a prophet in his own country. Not only, as Jason pointed out, are you respectful to the elders, like at the drinking party in town when he would leave after the elders left and that kind of thing, but it's his hometown, so everybody's kind of like, the old men remember him when he was a gangly teenager trying to make his way in the world. So that's how I'd see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Will?
Let me just come to Chris
oh,
for 1 second. Thank you, Chris. You point out a very important point, which I didn't think through. I just direct translate as his Confucius hometown. But the big question would be, how does he behave in Will's hometown or Chris's hometown, right? So that's a good question. So I have no answer, but I will assume here means his own hometown.
I think in other people's hometown, if I recall, he asks politely about the rules and what was that? There's another point in the Analects where he asks about the practices of the country and gently basically spies the place out to see if it's worthwhile.
very good. Will?
Yeah, I thank you, Jason and Aman, for clarifying that sort of everything is has its own formality and that tea houses are kind of maybe the place where people would let their hair down. I do I know in Buddhism, like one of their 10 commandments, so to speak, is like to not talk unnecessarily. And so I don't know if there's like a value in European cultures as well as much, but certainly within Buddhist culture, there's it's seen as a virtue sort of to not just talk unnecessarily, like without purpose and meaning. I know, like when I'm reading literature from before 100 years ago, I do notice people like in the Midwest and England and places are not as talkative, so that maybe that is just a sort of modern phenomenon that we just kind of are always talking all the time. But yeah, I just want to point out that maybe it's not exclusive to Confucianism, this idea that it's a virtue to kind of be silent in general. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. With that, we will move to.
That's what I mean. Let me respond
Please.
to Will's about Buddhism. I just don't. In my opinion, I think both Buddhism and the Confucianism talking about silence, but I think that they are very different, in my opinion, because the Buddhism's silence is wisdom, okay, and the Confucius' silence is ritual. I think they behave the same, but the purpose are different.
Very good. Great comments, everyone. So we shall get started with 10.3. Jason, do you want to group these or no?
No, I think 10.3 by itself and talk about how Confucius greet the visitor when he.
Okay. This is 10.3. When summoned by his lord to play the role of aide to the host, he changed his complexion and took his steps circumspectly. When bowing to those who stood beside him, he extended his clasped hands to the left or right, adjusting the front and back edges of his robe. When hastening forward, he looked like he was gliding on wings. When a guest would retire, he would always report on the mission, saying, "The guest did not look back." Will, would you like to read your version?
Yeah. Sorry, let me just turn the page here. Okay. When a ruler summoned him to assist the chief counselor in receiving a guest of the state, his face took on a solemn expression and his steps a brisk pace. When he bowed to those standing around him, raising his cupped hands to the right and to the left, his robed skirt swayed front and back without being ruffled. When going forward with quickened steps, he was like a bird about to take flight. After the guest had left, he always came back to report to the ruler, "The guest is no longer looking back."
What? Just 1 minute. Do you see the big screen or the big text?
Yeah, but there we can. Yeah,
Okay.
you can go a little bigger if possible.
So I don't know anybody wondering why it's talking about like birds or like wind. Okay. So let me read my translation. When the prince summoned him, which means Confucius, to greet guests, his countenance appeared vigorous. He walked in small steps. He bowed and stood beside the guest. He moved his left and right arms. The front and the back of his clothes swung evenly. He walked toward the guest quickly and attentively. When the guest has retired, he always reported to the prince, "The guests are not looking back anymore." That means the guest is leaving. I think this one has I think it's a lot of translation talk about wind, because this word 意如也, okay, 如 is just like as such, like 意 means wind. So I don't think we should translate as wind or like birds, because it sounds strange, like when you walk and you open your arm like wind, you want to hug the guest. I don't think so. So I think the meaning yi means attentively, carefully. So he behaved working carefully. Okay. So that's why I use yi in the Chinese word called, today we call 小心翼翼, careful wing, like wing, like the birds, you know, you use wing to protect the chick. Okay, so I think that's the meaning. So I don't think we should translate as wing. So you can see how I think this description is very vividly describe how Confucius behave, right? When the guest come, he's not only behave, he also changed his facial expression. In the book 2, when I think Zixia, who asked about Xiao, the filial piety, he said the most difficult part is your facial expression. So he has to change facial expression and walk fast, and then he has to use right hand and left hand wave. And remember, his clothes, they are wearing long skirt. The hem of clothes also move evenly. So he's very carefully move and close and attentively to receive the guest until the guest leave, then report to the prince. I think that's the description, how Confucius behave on this kind of function.
Thank you, Aman, and go ahead and for everyone else, could just type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom and to share your comments on this passage.
I agree with Jason. I think "e" is actually meant here as a illustrative idea, not to be taken literally. However, I also wanted to point out that "e" can also mean to assist, that it's another meaning of that word. And so the sort of double entendre that exists by using that makes a lot of sense, that this would mean to be attentive to guests, that is what you're attempting to do. The only other thing that I think it was said really well, but the very last line, the guests are not looking back anymore. This is a complete non sequitur aside, but many people have asked about my screensaver many a time, and we had to have a long conversation about vaudeville when we were doing the Tao Te Ching because of this. One of the things that I love about vaudeville is that the last act of a vaudeville show used to be called the haircut act. We always think performances as put your best act at the end because you want to just leave them with a wow. They wanted the last act to bore the audience so they'd up and get out of the seats so they could turn it over and get the next act in. So the last act was called the haircut act because they expected all you'd be able to see of the audience were their haircuts as they were walking out the door. And when I read this chapter of the Analects and that line, the guests are not looking back anymore, all I could think was, I wonder who the haircut act was. Completely non sequitur, but I definitely thought it was, relevant to some degree.
Does anybody else wish to share their thoughts on this passage, 10.3? Personally, I'll go ahead and share a couple just thoughts really quickly. Was basically, I looked at this as a very kind of, he was fulfilling his duties as a host. Oh, I'm sorry. I had Sebastian and Mark.
My thoughts on this were a disciple looking onward to Confucius. He's not isolated. He's not an isolated person in the court or his village, and people interact. And maybe to Jason or what was previously said, is this disciple trying to show us that he's part of a ritual or is he singular? Is he trying to teach us, or is he part of a more or less, I guess, body of people who are located in this vicinity at this particular time? I didn't want to take Confucius out of the picture. If he's going to blend in, he's obviously blending in with those who are around him. And when he describes external things like his garments swaying or his gestures, they're not singular. They're part of a community. So what is the disciple really trying to tell us? That Confucius is apart, or is he more or less blending into the fabric? Thank you.
I'll tackle that one if I may.
Please.
Because two things. One, we can't know. I'll start off with that. Just historicity. We don't know who the reporter was for these actions of Confucius. We do know it was somebody who observed him and found his actions as an abject lesson in the things that he was trying to teach others. And in that, he stood out. He would not have been somebody who could simply melt into the crowd. He stood out because of his constant insistence on being true to his form, as making not just the lessons for the classroom, but in everything he did in every facet of his life. And so he exhibited Ren, he exhibited Li, he exhibited, Shao in the smallest details of his every action. The reporter of this picked up on that, saw it, and thought it worthy of an entire book of the Analects to illustrate not only did he speak a good game in the class, as it were, but that even his life was an abject lesson in the lessons he was trying to teach his followers. And so I just can't see a situation where Confucius was overlooked as a wallflower because he didn't stand out in some way. He may have been overlooked for jobs, but probably because the force of his personality intimidated a lot of people.
Can I just have a rebuttal? So is he aritual or is he ritualistic in this? Because it seems that as he travels, and even whoever the reporter is, it's important for the reporter to see the value of Confucius in this community. And if he's a standout, is he part of that community? In other words, obviously he's part of the village and the family, but is he part of the court? Where does he stand in this? If he's, I wouldn't say isolating himself. I can understand as he's a teacher, but he's also a disciple himself. So where is he going with this?
He was only employed briefly, once, and once in official capacity. He had employment in his youth, which was actually kind of a shameful thing. We talked about that, nouveau riche. But he was ritualistic. He would stand out because he was true to the rituals as they were transmitted to him, even to the extent that it rubbed against the grain of now the common norm. And that was illustrated in an earlier chapter where it said something about people will now just bow when they get in front of the temple's doorsteps, as opposed to before they ascend and after they ascend, like they're supposed to. So his insistence on following the rituals as they were transmitted would make him a standout. Something of an anachronism, if you will. But he was not ritualistic by any means. He was, in fact, more an adherent to them than the common Joe Blow. And because of that, that would make him stand out more.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's important to know in this book, probably everything talked about is during Confucius was employed in the state of Lu. That's between his, I think it's from 51 years old to 55 years old. okay, during this period of time. Okay, so all this one probably talking about him in this period of time.
Thank you both, Jason and Ramon. Mark.
Thanks, Joseph. I was wondering about just in the first, I guess, 4 chapters that we've read, the way in which,
3.
Oh, sorry, 3.
3.
The way in which motion and rest are conceptualized, the way in which speech and silence are conceptualized. And I see there's a kind of dichotomy going on, and I appreciate the earlier comments by, I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name now, but about the dichotomy between the village and the state, the court, right? And you mentioned this saying about how when you're in the village, you should be thinking about the court, and when you're in the court, you should be thinking about the village. And I'm also wondering about the relationship between sound and silence, the relationship between motion and rest. Sometimes motion is privileged, such as when he is receiving a guest. Sometimes rest is privileged, such as when he is at court in front of the Duke, and even his breathing is reduced to the point where it seems as if he's almost not breathing. So I'm thinking maybe this is something that we can keep thinking about as we go through book 10, but I'd love to hear if anyone has any thoughts about why rest or an absence of motion is associated with a higher place in the hierarchy when you are being addressed to something that is higher in the hierarchy, and motion and speech are important when you're addressing either someone who's lower or, well, I think I'll stop there.
I mean, I can give my impression and then leave it to Aman and Jason. For me, this is just his ability to know when to behave a certain way. And it comes back to the idea of adaptability, when to speak, how to breathe, how to be in each situation that he's actually in. So it's just a self-awareness, I think, for me, that he understands how to address everyone. It's kind of sage-like in the way you're describing it anyway. So that's, I'll let Jason and Aman expand on that.
Yeah,
Tell me if I'm wrong.
I think that's very important in the Confucianism. So when we talk about virtue, let's say virtue, okay, or you talk about your psychologist, your virtual behavior, we can have the 2 schools, right? One only care about your behavior, okay? I give the money to the poor, that's good. But in my mind, I probably say I'm showing off in front of other people, so it doesn't matter, okay? As long as you give money to the poor, I don't care. You are a good person. I don't care. What's your purpose? You want to show off, or you really want to help the person? So that's one way to think about. Another school will say, doesn't matter about your heart. If you have a true heart to help the other people, even give a dime, it's fine. Even if you don't have the heart, you give a million, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we can kind of look at about idealism, or you look at about behaviorism, right? So if we look at these 2 schools, and where does Confucius ritual fit in, right? So you may say it's a behaviorism. As long as I perform the ritual, I bow, I keep quiet, I do something. Is that right? Probably not, because you should have your heart on that. You should treat something, but how can we know? I think that's Confucianism make a very good point, especially in this book. That's a very good point here, because he described the behavior to the very detail. So, for example, your facial expression, how you, like, I think Mark jumped ahead, that's chapter 4. Kind of like you don't breathe, okay? Quiet to the point, like you don't breathe. So if you think about an actor, that take a very excellent actor to act this way, okay? So unless you must be either a professional actor or you have the true heart of the respectful. Okay, so I think this book 10 described the behavior and your mind in this detailed way. So it's very hard for you if you don't have this heart and you can behave in this way. So I think that's the teaching on this book, book 10. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's an excellent answer. Are there any other comments? If not, we'll go to, go ahead, please, Aman.
I was just going to bring it down to sort of a real life, real time sort of example. The discretion of whether or not to raise your hand and speak in the group, or whether or not to remain silent and let others have their say first, or to let the conversation go. That is real time, us playing with this feel of sensitivity to others and not being, I could easily raise my hand and have a lot to say every single time about every single thing. And I have to question, am I doing it too much? Am I not doing it enough? Am I remaining silent and just being a voyeur a bit too much? That sort of virtuosity in knowing the right balance are what they're trying to capture in these lessons, in these little verses. And I think they do a good job of it by focusing in on so much of the minutia of it. And now I'll follow my own example.
Very good. Connie, please.
Aman, you never speak too much. I mean, I could just listen to you forever. Now, I have joined a number of the groups in 52 Living Ideas. Joe would be surprised to probably hear that I'm an extrovert. He's in a lot of the meetings that I go to, because I am kind of a voyeur, and I feel somewhat like I'm not giving sometime. But I tried to talk a couple of times in the beginning, and I realized I get all muddled up. So I know to just be quiet. And so I'm on your example, and that's why I am, to let the people that know what they're talking about and knowing when to just be silent. So Aman, you'll make me laugh. I just had to say that. Thank you.
I don't think anybody gets tired of hearing it from Aman, so I'll just say that.
Too many students would disagree with you.
Go ahead, Mark. No, I want to get to 10.4, it's because we're an hour in, we're only 4 in.
I really hesitate to chime in, but I guess I just wanted to maybe clarify my question a little bit. And it was less about why we are choreographing it in this way. And my question was more about why stillness and silence should be the way to act with respect to someone who's higher than you in the hierarchy. What is it saying about stillness and silence? Whereas quick speech and swiftness of motion is the way to act. But why is that? Why should it be divided that way? And what is it saying about the notion of stillness itself and the notion of rest itself, that they are conceived of in this way? And I don't know if that clarified it, but just put it out there.
It's a little bit more clear. Anybody want to comment?
I can comment, but I have no answer. But I think that's probably only a two possible answer, right? So it could be convention, could be innate, right? Two kind of answer. So I don't know, So they will ask, like, let's find in the Amazon primary society. Is that possible? You will be polite if you speak loud and quickly in front of your senior to show your respect. Is that possible? The senior, the people, the prince should stand up and walking around, but the lower ranking officer should sit down and and lay down on the floor to show respect. I'm not sure, but that's one of the possible answer.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mark. With that, we will go to 10.4, unless Mark, you have another comment. Okay. This is 10.4. When passing through the gate to the Lord's court, he bent his body as though the gate were not large enough to admit him. When standing, he did not stay in the gateway. When moving, he did not step on the threshold. When passing by the official stations in the court, he changed his complexion and took his steps circumspectly. When speaking, he acted as though he were short of words. When ascending the hall, he lifted up the bottom edge of his lower garment and bent his body. He held his breath as though he were not breathing. When coming out of the hall, he relaxed his complexion after descending one step of the stairs as though he were pleased. When reaching the bottom of the stairs, he proceeded toward his station, looking like he was gliding on wings. Upon returning to his station, he looked respectful and tense. Will, would you like to go ahead and read your version?
All right. I'll read DC Lau on this one. On going through the outer gates to his Lord's court, he drew himself in as though the entrance was too small to admit him. When he stood, he did not occupy the center of the gateway. When he walked, he did not step on the threshold. When he went past the station of his Lord, his face took on a serious expression. His steps became brisk and his words seemed more laconic. When he lifted the hem of his robe to ascend the hall, he drew himself in, stopped inhaling as if he had no need to breathe. When he'd come out and descended the first step, relaxing his expression, he seemed no longer to be tense. When he had reached the bottom of the steps, he went forward with quickened steps as though he was gliding on wings. When he resumed his station, his bearing was respectful. Thanks.
Thank you, Will.
Okay, 10.4. Okay, this one is again talking about how Confucius go inside. I think the reference would be, if you remember, I think it's in book 9, chapter 3, Confucius complained, right? Nowadays, people bow after ascending. So here he talking about how he prepared. So here is the proof. What's the proper way? Because like Aman said, people are lazy now. So they just, because you are in the bottom and the prince on the top, right? He probably not seeing you, or, so you don't have to bow until you ascend, then you bow. So you can see how Confucius behave. I think even the prince is not there. Doesn't matter the prince is there or not. As long as the seat is there, Confucius will behave as if the prince sitting there. So when Confucius came through the court door, he bowed down deferentially as if there was not enough space. I think that's a very good description, right? You bow, you just feel like it's in a very tight place. You don't just like relax and bow. So you got to use your heart. Otherwise, you cannot do this way. He did not stand in the middle, and he will not step on the threshold. This one also interesting because when I was a kid, my parents or senior always tell me, don't stay in the middle of the, don't stay on the middle of the gate. Don't step on the threshold. I don't know why, but here has a Confucius teaching. When he passed in front of Prince's seat, his countenance appeared vigorous. He walked in small steps, and he would speak as if it were difficult for him. He lifted the hem of his robes when entering the hall. He bowed down and held his breath as if he needed not to breathe. I think I forget the not. On departing, once he had descended one level, his countenance appeared relaxed, and he felt relieved. After reaching the last step, he moved forward attentively and then walked in small steps, returning to his position. So again, the wing, he used the word wing. I translate as attentively. So I think that's, again, another description, a lot of description about how Confucius behaved when he entered, ascend, descend, and return to his position.
I'll be terse. The only thing I was going to say was where you're just about to add a not, I don't think it needs it, because the sentence, he bowed down and held his breath as if he needed to breathe. Holding your breath as if you need to breathe creates this impression of somebody with a very sort of drawn face. And if you were to say, holding your breath as if you needed not to breathe or didn't need to breathe, then you seems more of a serene face. And I think it is an attempt to express his earnestness. He holds his breath in making this movement, in bowing, because he is very earnest in doing so. So that was why I didn't make that suggestion when we did that. But this gets into minutia. I mean, you talk about, splicing hairs. This is something that little conversation between Jason and I probably was a debate between scholars in China for centuries, just to get the expression right, just to make sure that they were getting it correct. This was what the master did. This was how he was. And this is how we should say it. The one thing you can say about the Analects, if you can say nothing else, is that nothing in here was thrown in slapdash, haphazardly, or without deep consideration.
Winston.
Yes, I'm just curious about the translation that Jason showed us just now. I'm wondering where is the 橙颜色, which is the last sentence. Could you share your screen again?
Oh, okay, just 1 minute. You're talking about the 色薄如也, right?
I was talking about 出将一等橙颜色.
Oh, 橙颜色. Okay, that's the interesting part. Yes. So, after reaching the last, he moved forward. No. Oh, his countenance appeared relaxed. Okay, and feel, and yi yi ru ye, I translate as he felt relieved. So 呈颜色, okay, 颜色 means the facial expression. He 呈 means he appear, okay, and 如如也 yi appear his facial expression, relax and relax. So that's the whole sentence I translate. I don't know, how do you think? It's a difficult one.
Yes, it is. I think it is a clear and precise translation. I really
Okay.
appreciate that.
So you agree or you have a different idea? I know this
Yeah, I
part
agree.
is very difficult.
Yes, it's really difficult.
Okay, if there aren't any comments, I actually froze in that time there. So next up we have, I believe we have Chris followed by Will.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm first. Yeah, I just wanted to throw in a couple of kind of cultural notes from another culture, from Russia, actually. Thresholds. Russians don't shake hands across a threshold. It's a curious superstition. Also, in the Russian church, you have the royal door. That's the door in the middle of the altar, and only the priest goes in there, or a male child who has been just brought into the church. So again, this idea of the centrality. In China, though, what it reminds me of is that which is in the center is kind of out and exposed. So if you look at, for instance, the Han Dynasty, there was a superstition about roads. You would make an offering at the beginning of a journey, and the middle of the road was considered the most dangerous place. So people would stick to the sides of the road. So the middle of the road was where the demons were running down the line, and you would make an offering. And there's one point, in fact, in the Forest of Changes, where there's a very ironic verse about making one of these offerings on the road, and in the middle of making the offering, a big wind comes up and knocks over the ancestral tablets and the offerings, and messes the whole thing up. And it's kind of, you felt that kind of sense of like, well, that offering went really well, didn't it? Very much of an ironic humor to it. And the Jiao Shi Yinan, by the way, in the Chinese. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Will.
One thing that I'm noticing is that Confucianism, when I think of like ways of life or philosophies of life, like I think like when you become a master at something, like it becomes natural, and you there's no tension, and you have no qualms, or virtue kind of comes with just ease. But there's something very just humble and human about this, as I think it would maybe contrast with maybe Stoicism, where Confucius is like, even a master knows when he should be like tense and just like uncomfortable, even as a master, like in certain situations. I just found that striking. Thank you.
It's much more prescriptive. So in the sense that it is out of the box, you pull it out and you actually have a way of being. Whereas, Stoicism has a ultimate goal, and how you reach that goal is, it's not necessarily something where it's formulaic. So this is a much more ritual based, and that's my perspective. That I'd love to hear Amon's.
I was going to agree, though I would say that virtuosity is there to be had. You just have to have been working diligently at this for 50 to 60 years. Because when the master reached the age of 70, he could follow his heart's desire without worry about trespassing on the rules of Li, or the propriety of ritual. So it is almost Pavlovian within, to a certain degree. That prescription is meant to make it rote. But if you can re-engage your mind when something is rote, re-engage why you are actually earnestly interested in doing this ritual, this performance, this thing, at some point, he tells us these will dovetail together, but it's going to take you about 50 years of nonstop, diligent polishing and grinding, polishing and grinding.
So with that, we'll move on to 10.5 unless Mark.
Thanks. I just have one last question about this. I'm looking at the Slingerland translation, and he uses the same English in 10.4 at the beginning. When entering the gate of his duke, he would draw himself in, as if the gate were not large enough to admit him. So the expression there, draw himself in, is repeated when he ascended to the duke's dais with the hem of his gown gathered in his hands. He would draw himself in, slowing his breath to the point that it seems as if he were not breathing. So I guess my first question is about, is this actually the same phrase in Chinese that is being used, or in whatever dialect this is? I can't say exactly. And does it imply taking a breath in? Because when we take a breath in, we make our bodies actually larger than they are, in a way. And when we breathe out, we somehow get smaller. Is that kind of what is being implied here?
I was the words are the same, right? So you talk about when he enters through the court door, he bowed down deferentially. Okay, and then second sentence, when he dipped the hem of his clothes entering the hall, he bowed down. Okay, deferentially. Okay, so the same thing, 鞠躬如也. Okay, same, exactly the same word. But the second sentence is talking about holding his breath, or seems about need to breathe, something like this. So they use the same Chinese word.
Are there any other comments? I will say that you do see Confucius's humility again too, coming out in the first few lines. But in any case, let's get started with 10.5.
10.5 still doing the same word, 鞠躬, bow down, still use the same word. Okay.
When carrying the jade tablet of his lord, he bent his body as though he could not bear its weight. He held it as high as his hands are when clasped together for a bow, as low as his hands are when giving something to someone. He changed his complexion as though he felt fear. He moved with short steps as though walking on his heels. During the ritual of offering gifts, he looked at ease. When having a private audience with a guest, he looked pleased.
All right, mine says, this is An Ping Chen again. When he carried the jade tablet of his ruler in the role of an emissary, he drew himself in as if he could not bear the weight. When he held it high, it seemed as if he was bowing to someone. When he held it low, it seemed as if he was offering an object to someone. He looked alert, as though in fear of making a mistake. as he walked in small steps, as though his feet never left the ground. Oh, and he walked in small steps, as though his feet never left the ground, like the wheels of a cart. But he looked amiable when presenting the official gifts, and was even more agreeable in a private audience.
Thank you, Will. Okay, the translated the word 速速如也, and as he walked in the ground, like his feet never leave the ground. So remind me like Michael Jackson dancing, moonwalking. So, okay, 10.5. When Confucius held the jade tablet in ceremony, okay, so right now he is in the ancestral temple doing the ceremony. He bowed down as if he were not able to bear its weight. When he held it high, it was as though saluting with joined hand. When he held it low, it was as though about to confer it. His countenance appeared vigorous and embattled. His steps were carefully moving in line following line. During the ceremonies, his countenance was dignified. In private meeting, he seems joyful. So the last sentence also has a contract, right? His facial expression changed during the ceremony and then in the private meeting. So that's the translation. A few things I all translate as small walk, but at least in from 10.1 to 10.5. Okay, they have a different kind of walking. One called 触及, right? And one called 觉区速速. All this one I all translate to small walking, but I believe they have some subtle difference. I give up. I'm not going to figure out what's the difference. And then this word, being appear many times. In general, I translate as a salute or greeting with 40. So that means like this, right? That means like this. I don't know anybody have a suggestion. What would be the good word for this kind of greeting? And then a simple word, English word. I don't know anyone have a good suggestion. Yeah. So I'm out. Yeah.
Yeah, to dissect the nuances of shuffle versus prance versus fairy step. I mean, you could get very flowery and be way off the mark. But Jason is right. These do connote some sort of distinction in manners of movement, and those wouldn't be lost on students of his time. They're lost to the ages of history now, really. I'm sure some scholar somewhere has made his PhD on distinguishing the very, very fine steps of difference between one versus the other. What I do like about this is in Jason's translation, it's a lot more unwieldy to read through and understand than some of the other translations I've seen, where just trying to be faithful, but also trying to express how these movements look and what somebody's doing leaves it just something of a word salad. Honestly, when you read it, it's easy to get lost. You can see the movement, raising it up as if saluting, holding it between your palms, holding it at your side, down below, as if you were about to hand it off to somebody. I found this translation much easier to follow and much easier to sort of see the master perform this ritual in sort of my mind's eye than I had with many other translations.
Thank you, Juan. Wenchen.
Thank you. I kind of disagree with the translation of Qigong on Jason's translation because I just checked Qigong in the dictionary. Perhaps I can share my screen, but I can't. Well, I just checked that and I see Qigong has several meanings. It could mean bow down, but it is kind of a meaning that appeared more recently. And in the more ancient times, Qigong normally means respectfully and cautiously. And I believe that would make more sense because bow down always has emotion and it acts in a, well, just acts more, but cautiously and respectfully is an attitude, and based on that attitude, Confucius can act accordingly.
So I'd like to ask you, so in your opinion, 鞠躬 doesn't mean bow down.
Yes.
It means the attitude.
Respectfully and perform respectfully and cautiously.
Okay, that could make sense. I can check because it's important because in the
Yes, it appears so many
it's being
times.
used so many times in the first 5 chapters.
Yes,
So
you
I
can
think
check.
will take a look.
I guess this meaning changed because it's just from my guessing. I'm not an expert on this, but from my guessing, it may comes from the Tang Dynasty. There is a famous poem that is 鞠躬尽瘁. It is the poem for
Yes, that's
Zhuge
mentioned.
Liang, and it's what is that?
I'm sorry. I think you got reversed because as an attitude could be later meaning, and as a behavior could be original meaning. That's what I think. Because originally during that time means you really bow down, but in the later time, like you said, 鞠躬尽瘁 has been used as an attitude, being attentively do your best. One of my support is based on Zhu Xi's interpretation. He said, bend your body. That's Zhu Xi's word. So it's still debatable, but that's the reason I translate as bow down.
Okay, I understand. Actually, I totally agree with you that from the linguistical perspective, normally the attitude will comes after the original action. While what I said about the meaning is because I just checked the dictionary and most of the examples the dictionary gave me, that I see the attitude meaning is more ancient and the extra meaning is more recent. That is why I say that point. I think you can check later.
Yeah, same as on the 触及, right?
触及.
How he walk, right? Also use 2 or 3 times. Some translation translate as like kind of nervous, right? But I still use the word as walking because I believe Confucius really walk, not just attitude. Okay, so that's the choice I make. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mark.
Thanks, Joseph. One of the things that strikes me about 10.5 is that it extends the relationship between the outward expression and the inward sense of mental attitude that seems to be flowing through this, which may be why, Jason, you said that the most difficult thing in filial piety is the countenance, the face. So there's a relationship between the inner world of attitudes and the outer world of ritual. And here it's extended to an actual object that is outside of us or apart from us. So the jade tablet can be used as an instrument and as an extension of the body to underline and emphasize the ritual. So the object becomes important, just as important as the body and the mental attitude. Possibly.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any comments, any follow-up comments to that? Go ahead, Omar.
Just briefly, I think, Mark, you're onto something. The actual jade tablet or that is being discussed was a real object, a true ceremonial object that would be used. But it's no coincidence that they selected a ceremony in which this tablet of jade would be, because jade is often used, as we talked about before, as a metaphor for the refining and polishing of the jinshi, or the, perfected gentleman.
Would anybody else like, go ahead, Sebastian.
I'm just curious, you're using the word respect, and then you want an outside or an outward, and I guess that's what Mark may be hitting at. What other way could you express yourself? You bow, you can hand movements, you could eye movements. So if you're trying to respect someone or offer respect, were there other avenues that the sages used, other than they wouldn't sit in front of you, they would probably stand? If bowing is important in one culture, a handshake may be in another. Is Confucius teaching us something here by his actions, or is he bringing forth something that's traditional in his society?
Go ahead, Mark.
Again, teaching and bringing forth something that was traditional. The whole thrust of Confucius' teaching is, and he says this with unequivocally, I am a transmitter, not an innovator. He is bringing back the ancient Zhou dynasty rituals that have been fluffed aside and forgotten. But I find the more interesting part of your question, how else could somebody show respect? And there are dozens of subtle ways, from something very difficult just in this format. We all face one another directly, but if you ever watch two people of different stations in a traditional Chinese or Japanese culture, they'll stand at angle to one another. They won't face head on necessarily. So your body position relative to someone else is important. How many people have probably encountered how you hand something to someone with two hands, as opposed to, sort of doing it idly with one. These are all minor gesticulations that all work together to eventually demonstrate not just respect, but also an understanding of station. Because you can do something that would be eminently disrespectful to your superior if you are doing it to an inferior with a good heart and love. My favorite example of this was a grandmother referring to her granddaughter as Shahaizi, or stupid child. You don't get to say that to someone else's child. You get to say it to your child. You are your grandchild. You're in a elevated position. But it was a term of endearment and love, whereas you would never refer to someone else, especially a superior's child, or grandchild is a stupid child, let alone would you call a superior that. So there are all sorts of little nuanced things that are contextual.
Okay, thank you.
There are no other comments. We'll go on to 10.6. There are a couple quotes, are quotes in the chat, and also a couple of links as well that people may be interested in.
So right now we move from the behavior to the clothes. Then we're going to on the food. Okay, so
Yes. 10.6. Actually, I have this one written down, so it's a little easier. The noble person did not use dark blue or dark red silks to decorate his upper garment, nor did he use the pink or purple silks to make casual wear. In hot weather, he wore an unlimited garment made of fine or coarse hemp. But when going out, he always put on an outer garment. Oh, well,
I think you should continue because so you
do you want me to continue?
Yeah, you should continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the end of 10.6. 10.7.
In the winter time, he wear the black clothes, right?
Yes.
My 10.6 goes on a lot longer.
Okay, so well, I'll go ahead and read 10.7 for me, and that way, you know, I can go back and actually read it all together. If that's helpful for everyone. Okay, so the noble person did not use dark blue or dark red silks to decorate his upper garment, nor did he use pink or purple silks to make casual wear. In hot weather, he wore an unlimited garment made of fine or coarse hemp. But when going out, he always put on an outer garment. Confucius wore a black upper garment for a lambskin outfit, a white upper garment for a fawn skin outfit, and a yellow upper garment for a fox skin outfit. His ordinary upper garment was long, but its right sleeve was short.
And continue.
It's much. Oh, and continue. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
continue,
10.8. Confucius always wore a sleeping garment, which was half again the length of his body. He had a thick mat made of fox or marten fur to sit in his personal residence. Should I keep going?
And they keep
When
going.
the period of mourning ended, Confucius did not restrict himself wearing ornaments. Except for the carriage curtain skirt, Confucius always made skirts to create a gradual reduction in girth. Confucius did not wear the lambskin dress or the black ceremonial cap on visits of condolence. On the first day of the month, Confucius always wore the ceremonial garments for the court audience to attend it.
Yeah, let's stop here. Let's stop here.
Okay. All right. You know, that's literally 10.12 for me. Like, so that's what from 10.6 to 10.12. It's
Okay.
I'm glad I actually printed these out because it's so much easier to read off paper than to read off this screen. So.
Okay. So basically, this one is to this point is talking about his clothes. Okay. So during the regular his daily clothes. So.
Yeah, that's pretty clear to me as well. Does anybody else wish to comment? Or actually, Will, do you want to read? Well, yeah, Will, please.
All right. Yeah, mine is puts all that into one into 10.6.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. The gentleman would not use reddish indigo or iron gray to trim his robe, nor vermilion and red for his casual clothes. In the heat of the summer, he wore an unlined garment of either fine or coarse hemp. but he always topped it with a jacket when he went out. He wore a black dust gown over lambskin, a white one over fawn skin, and a yellow one over fox fur. His informal fur coat was longer than his formal ones, but with a shorter right sleeve. When sleeping, he always had a coverlet, which was 1.5 times the length of his body. He used the thick fur of badgers and foxes as cushions to sit on. Other than when he was in mourning, he always wore his big sash with jade ornaments that were proper to his position, and except for his ceremonial skirts, which were made from single bolts of fabric with multiple pleats, all others were cut pieces sewn together. He never wore black kidskin jackets and black caps when making calls of condolence. And on the day of the new moon, he always went to court in his black court attire. Thanks.
Okay, so so here it doesn't say Confucius. Okay, so it start with Junzi. Okay, so in this chapter start with Junzi. It's not talking about Confucius, but we can assume that the subtle difference from 1 to 5. I think it's chapter 1. The Chinese word you start with Confucius. Okay, Kongzi, Mr. Kong. Okay, actually, the proper translation should be Mr. Kong or Confucius, right? It's not saying the master, it's saying Confucius doing something. Then up to chapter 5, there's no subject. So we just assume it's continued from chapter 1, it's Confucius. And the chapter 6 start with Junzi, okay, and sometimes translate superior man or gentleman. So that's the difference, but we can fairly assume when the writer, the author said Junzi, he meant Confucius. So a Junzi doesn't decorate his clothes with violet. So I try to make the color right. I try to make the sample of the color, but I just cannot get it, too difficult. So I just use the word violet because the color, why he doesn't wear this, they decorate with this one, that's the color for fasting, or so-called puce, that's for funeral, okay? He doesn't wear red or purple for the house clothes, okay? Because red or purple is used for the office, okay? When you work in the office. In the summer, okay, I think here is important because in a lot of place during the summer, you just bare torso at home, right? So that's what he said. In summer, he wears an undershirt of fine or coarse hem and always wear a jacket when he goes out. Okay, so that's important. I think we should follow the rule today. In the summer, don't wear the undershirt to go out. In winter, he wears black clothes with a lambskin jacket, plain clothes with a fawn skin jacket, and yellow clothes with a foxskin jacket. His house clothes are long with a shorter right sleeve because he need to work. So the right sleeve cut short, or easy for work. He always wears sleepwear that is longer than his body when he sleep, because when you sleep, you still want to cover your body. You don't want to sleep naked. So you have to make sure your sleeping wear is longer than your body. He sits on the thick fox and the badger rocks at home. When not in mourning period, he always wears jade on his sash. If the clothes are not for ceremony, they always have open seam. Then skin jacket or red cap, or you want to translate as black, okay? Probably black is better. Red cap are not suitable for condolence. On the first day of the month, he always goes to court dressed in full court robe. So let's describe how Confucius wear.
Aman, you want to make some comments? I think this one is somewhat straightforward.
It is straightforward, other than the nuances. I mean, Jason does an excellent job,
Right.
and with why the color of violet or puce are inappropriate, because they're associated with things like fasting or things like funeral. Those same associations would exist with each of these colors in each of these times, in each of these situations, and it's not worth dissecting each and every single one. Suffice to say that if Confucian's understanding of the rituals of the Zhou are correct, was a time where you could have gone to any Shandong, any countryside, and seen uniform appearances amongst the population, because they were all, in his utopian mind, following these rituals with an exactitude that had been lost in his modern time. After his time, you could also actually see, hundreds of years later, I won't say absolute uniformity, but so close as to not even bear a difference in terms of people attempting to ape the behaviors they understood of the master, so as to have some sort of sympathetic magic to gain his mastery over wisdom and knowledge. And that got more so and more so as the generations went on. Wensheng mentioned the Tang Dynasty is actually a nadir in that. And then in the song, it becomes just amped up to an even new level, where people were trying to be more Confucian than thou.
Thank you, Lon. Are there any other comments on this? If not, we can
I
try
think we
and
should,
get one more in.
I think we should read. I'm sorry, I put a note that we should put this next one together, but I forget. So because we should read chapter 7 and then we finish closing. So next week we can start with eating.
Start with what number?
Chapter 7 talk about it should be simple, and then probably I can.
Okay, so your 7 is my 13.
Yeah. Probably we can. I probably can start first, so we can finish today on this one, and basically this one is kind of redundant. Okay, so he said when fasting, he always wear clean and plain clothes. That's fasting. And he always wears sleepwear that is longer than his body. So this one could be being mistakenly insert, here. So this sentence probably unnecessary, right? Because, okay. And when fasting, he always change his diet and his seat. So this one should delete, okay, because it's repeat from the previous one. So 10.6 and 10.7 basics talk about how Confucius will, during this fasting or during the summer, during the winter, and how do the decoration, what kind of the beginning of month, what he need to do, during the condolence. And so in the morning, I think that's these 2 chapters is about.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? I mean, I'll just quickly read my translation. Is when staying calm for purification, Confucius always wore the spiritual outfit Meng Yi, I believe, which was made of hemp. When staying calm for purification, he always changed his food and moved to a different seat on which to stay. Will, do you want to go ahead and just read yours, and then we'll go to Oman?
Yes, sorry, I got lost in my pages here. Okay. In periods of purification, he invariably wore a house robe made of cheaper sort of material. In periods of purification, he invariably changed to a more austere diet, and when at home did not sit in his usual place.
Thank you all. Go ahead, Amon.
I won't say this of all the Analects, but I will say this of book 10. It makes me think of Elvis impersonators. The sheer devotion to getting the details right, to understanding each detail and each, idiosyncratic behavior was so important to these figures that we have this chapter of the Analects, but there were more commentary and text and books written on this for centuries after the fact, and all of them to be a better duplicate, a better impersonator of the behaviors of Confucius, because that was as perfected a behavior as most of the Chinese scholars could envision or could imagine. And so these details, while amusing to us, mattered deeply to these scholars. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but there was one of the Confucianists who took the life of Confucius as a model to follow, absolutely, and so actually went about trying to go where he went, do what he did, learn what he learned as a reconstruction from the Analects. And that's only one we have a recording of. I wish I could remember the name, but I'm sure it was not an uncommon feature amongst many the elevated class. So while these details just do seem kind of amusing and blasé, they were pithy, they were important, they mattered, because this was the only record we had of a Jinsher among us. And so it was the best model to follow. If Confucianism, as you mentioned before, was very prescriptive, then here is the behavior prescription that extends beyond the lesson plan.
Thank you for that, Amon. With that, it's just about time to wrap up. Mark.
I just wanted to add that the clothing helps to complete the relationship between the inner and the outer. It becomes an extension of our outer self and our inner thoughts, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth noting that, Confucius was very upset when people were starting to abandon clothing. So the proper colors anyway. So with that, we will just get started with really quickly. I'll do some very brief announcements. Tomorrow we'll be covering it'll be Comprehensivist Wednesdays. We'll be covering neuroscience with Sanjay. He has not provided a topic yet, but he will provide one by tomorrow. The Gospel of John, chapters 15, what is the Holy Spirit? And Design Your Life, second innings. That is the Friday evening meetup. And then Asian Philosophies, Materialism of Wang Fengzhu, is it? Jason?
Wang Fuzhi. Okay, so yeah, that's another school of Neo-Confucianism, in the beginning at the 17th century. So
Okay, very good.
yeah, so we are moving along to close to today. So
Good. All right. Well,
Was
thank
this-
you,
was
everyone.
this meeting-
We will-
Was this meeting 1 hour earlier than usual? Did you
Yes,
start?
it was.